the support. Everyone's been talking about the support that's important, but it's really how you create the curriculum. Support for something that don't make any sense for people is nice, but it can only go so far. But if you're creating a curriculum, we had a guy that created a safe house for kids in the neighborhood that he wrecked 20 years ago before he went to prison. Okay? That wasn't like school. He said, once I got that going, I wasn't in school anymore. Another woman created a theater group. Another woman, so they take projects that they love, and then they don't drop out. And then you fit all the courses into that. And you know what? You can do it.
You can say that Nick is deeply in the trenches of delivering higher education to new learners and is uniquely using technology to teach technology. But as he reminded me just the other day, a good student is not necessarily a good learner. And to get behind that catchy phrase, Nick, I think I'm going to turn it right over to you. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, there goes my 5 minutes. That's all the stuff I was just going to say.
Okay, so I'll take over.
Now, thank you for having me be here today. I've always kind of been intrigued with, I mean, I love engineering. And I kind of consider myself a techie, but after about 15 years of doing techie stuff in the traditional manner, I started thinking about, boy, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that's when I started getting involved in learning about learner-centered learning. I was inspired by a book, and some of you may have read it. It's called How People Learn, John Bransford et al., which inspired me to shift in my mind what my job was from being an engineer, which is what I always thought I was, to an educator. Because I kept struggling with, trying to get students more engaged in their learning. And I was taught in the traditional manner, engineering school, chalk and talk, and chapter problems, and I wanted to break away from that, break out of that. And so that's when I started going to school for my PhD, and started learning all about cognitive science and how people learn, and it kind of transformed my learning. So I'm kind of like a case study in how to transform people. I was going to ask a question earlier of the panel. We do a lot of research now on teacher adaptation of problem-based learning methods, and there's always a struggle with all the professional development that we do for teachers. There's some who get it and some who don't. And we actually sponsored a doctoral degree last year, a student from Northeastern University, looking at teacher adaptation strategies. So, in addition to being a professor at Springfield, I also am an adjunct professor, shout out to adjuncts, at Central Connecticut State University, when I actually teach an undergraduate course in problem-based learning for engineering and technology education majors, and I'm also an adjunct at the University of Connecticut. So, I kind of wear several hats, but my favorite hat is working with the New England Board of Higher Ed, and I've been working with these guys for 20 years now on projects from the National Science Foundation dealing with curriculum development, program development, and it wasn't until about 10 years ago where we started looking at trying to teach pedagogical methods that are more learner-centered. And so we got our first grant from the National Science Foundation for doing PBL. It's called Photon PBL, and it was the first of 3 grants, 3-year grants, for developing curriculum materials in problem-based learning. The first set were focused on photonics and optics. It was kind of selfish. But the second one was in STEM education, where we looked at sustainable technologies and including wind, solar, sustainable agriculture, kind of like outside of my realm of expertise. And the last grant, which is just finishing up now, is deals with advanced manufacturing, problem-based learning and advanced manufacturing. Basically what we do is we go out to companies and ask them to replicate or reenact the problem-solving methods that they use to solve real-world problems. The whole idea is, how do you get real-world problems into the classroom to engage students in learning that is real, that is purposeful, and things that they will have to experience when they go out. We focus a lot on companies that actually hire our graduates. So that is in its 10th year now with the New England Board, and so far we've created a pretty big body of knowledge that's available online for free through the New England Board's website, pblprojects.org. I encourage you guys to go look at that, and if you find it useful, it's free. Bring it to your class, use it, and hopefully we can all become more learner-centered in teaching.
Schools that Dennis has founded have had startling success in reduction of dropout rates and in increasing college matriculation rates. One of the recurrent themes in Dennis's approach to education at any level is the importance of cultivating motivation in the learner, finding what has meaning on an individual basis in the learner, and then individualizing the instruction so that motivation creates the fuel to do well and to succeed. Perhaps a good way to sum of his philosophy was in his response to standardized tests, to which his retort was, "Who wants a standardized kid?" And so giving students respect for their individuality has been a cornerstone of his approach. Dennis's non-traditional work in education has led him to become passionate about serving non-traditional and disadvantaged populations, and as such he's received major funding from the Gates Foundation and from the George Lucas Foundation. Dennis has been way out ahead of the curve in creating learner-centric environments with his own version of the 3 R's: relationships, relevance, and rigor. And with that, Dennis, take it away.
How many were in here to see the woman who was embarrassed because her suitcase didn't come through, and so she had to be in here in sneakers? So I went up to her and told her if she wore good sneaks. Hold on, I'll try. Oh, there.
Those are nice.
The funny thing to me is it's sad that the conference has to be named learner-centered institutions. That should be more of what we do rather than, hey, this is something new, okay? And colleges always say, students gotta be college ready. Well, really, colleges should be student ready. You know, it's like, who are we now to say you can't get in? Imagine if when I ran high schools, I said you can't come in, ever, because you don't live up to my standards. Or kindergartens try to do that for a little while, but then let people in. So I just think it's something that should be the norm, and I don't know how to break that. So then what I did is start our own college, so I become my own president and my own provost right there by starting from scratch. So my background is I started running high schools. I get fired everywhere I go. But I keep winning, so I was community organizer in New York and then started a high school in Long Island, got fired, but I managed to win all these cases. Then I went to New Hampshire, got fired, and if you're old enough to smell the theater, then you remember LA Law. And that time I got fired, Michael Tucker from LA Law played me in a Monday night movie. I make copies illegally to see if I can really get busted. You can come up and get this copy
It's
right
okay,
here.
it's on YouTube, don't bother.
It's not on YouTube now. So, and then I got, I was the first high school in Ted Sizer's Coalition for Essential Schools, and he was at Brown. And after 14 years in New Hampshire, I don't die at the end of that, by the way, I went to Brown University. It's not clear if I got fired from there, if I left there. I'm not sure. But at the same time that I think I was about to be fired, the commissioner of education asked me if I'd create a model school for the state. And I'd done a couple schools, and I said, only if I could do exactly how I want. And he actually said yes. And that's where we created this. I have a nonprofit called Big Picture, created this Met School, and it's not project-based learning, it's the next step. It's interest-based, project-based learning. So every kid has their own curriculum. And that's what I did. And then Bill Gates heard about it. His top man said it was his favorite school in the country. Him and my mom said that, 2 good people to say that, and give me a lot of money to spread it around the country. And so I have 58 schools now, based on that philosophy in the United States, and another 70 in Australia and the Netherlands. And then about 8 years ago, we started saying, colleges suck if you're poor. They really do. You know, 89%, you saw the graph this morning, it's ridiculous. And we felt we could create something different if we did it interest-based and really connected all the classes in. And that's when we started College Unbound. And then we started getting a demand by the older people in town to say, we can't get back in school. We don't want to sit with 18-year-olds. We can't come to a class at 2 in the afternoon. We can't take one class at a time. We'll be as old as you, they told me before they graduate. And so can you guys do something? So we kind of morphed it into everything that we know, everything you've been saying. The beauty is you get to start from scratch. So you don't have to hire anybody who doesn't believe in what you're doing. And so we have figured out a way in our college to meet one night a week for 3 hours. We're online and offline. I'll talk about that a little bit. So that's how they pick up stuff. They're doing projects in their place of work. So that counts. There's full food when they walk in because they're all coming from work. There's daycare there because some don't know what to do with their new baby. We take care of that. So all those things you heard, we do and try to support. And honestly, it's not so hard. And we have, over 70% Pell, and we're graduating 85% because the support, everyone's been talking about the support that's important, but it's really how you create the curriculum. Support for something that don't make any sense for people is nice, but it can only go so far. But if you're creating a curriculum, we had a guy that created a safe house for kids in the neighborhood that he wrecked 20 years ago before he went to prison. Okay? That wasn't like school. He said, once I got that going, I wasn't in school anymore. Another woman created a theater group. Another woman, so they take projects that they love, and then they don't drop out. And then you fit all the courses into that. And you know what? You can do it. So that's what we've been doing. We've been working with Charter Oak State College, which is a degree completion college. And I don't believe in online by itself with this population. So we work closely with them and have a cohort and a support and a learning team, but their stuff's real. And then last year, after about a year and a half, we won approval as our own college in the state of Rhode Island. There hasn't been one in the state of Rhode Island for 21 years, yes. And we did that, and now we're going through NEASC to be our own. So a couple quick things about technology. It's very fun. Ours are scared as hell of technology. And we have a whole group that had just gotten out of prison who had never, it shocked me, had never seen a computer. So we take all these students, we're on reservations, we're with former prisoners, a lot of single moms who are scared of it. So we have to integrate it in a different way. Our students couldn't do just online because they're scared. They go, one mistake, they run away. So in a sense right now we're doing the hybrid model, but I want to do more, and that's why we're going at it ourselves. So a lot of times people think, and this is what our discussion was, tech is a silver bullet, but it's really trying to understand who you got in front of you, what they need, and then how that can support you. So we're trying to figure out how the online can support people in projects, how they can communicate so they don't have to be in school all the time, and we count those as hours. So we're using it, but not in the traditional way. And so much is, old wine in new bottles. Take in what you learned and put it in here. And we're trying to recreate around those skills. People are talking about problem solving today. Oh, everyone says problem solving. We are evaluating on problem solving, creativity, perseverance. We're saying it's about applying the knowledge. You're not giving us back anything. It's showing you use that. And the last thing is we hope to, as soon as we figure this out and get our accreditation, spread it around the world, we need to use the technology. So we have to figure that out. I'm done. Thank you.
Dennis, thanks very much. Eileen, our next speaker, was on the board of trustees of Brown University, and she assures me that she assures me that you left voluntarily.
All right. I just saw Bartan the other day. You didn't tell me.
Eileen Rudden is co-founder and partner in Learn Launch of Boston, which offers funding and other kinds of logistical support to leading ed tech startup companies. From her position at Learn Launch, Ellen is getting to see a very wide range of companies responding to the perceived urgency in the market to get better results for students and to personalize the education process. And without violating any inside trading regulations, Eileen, where do you see the money going, and what will make ed tech companies successful in higher education going forward?
Well,
You don't have to answer that question, but.
How many, I'd be interested in you as an audience, how many of you are interested yourselves, have a problem that you want to apply technology to get better results? I mean, is that why you're in this? So many of you. And the challenge is really what problem you're bringing, because as has been said earlier, technology, is a tool that is certainly helping many organizations, including institutions of higher ed, lower costs and improve student persistence or provide more personalized learning. But it really will depend on really what your objective is. But I thought that just to bring maybe my top 5 for you, and then I know there'll be lots of questions as we go along. But I think there are really 5 tech trends that are supporting the move to learner-centered education. And the first really is the increased availability of data. Your institutions are probably flooded with data, but when you look at the desire of most institutions of higher ed today to increase student persistence, both for the kids and for the revenue, there is an important opportunity to understand which students are most at risk, so that you can bring them you can bring the interventions to the kids that need it. Organizations like Starfish Retention, Civitas Learning, or your own IT department and your own data warehouse really can bring you the insights into which students might need those interventions. Flipped classrooms. I think everybody here, we're talking about problem-based learning, project-based learning, active learning. I mean, whether it's a new adult learner, where the research definitely says that adults need to be engaged in the learning, or whether it's a coming-of-age learner, the research is also that active learning is much more effective in terms of student engagement. There are very many platforms today, whether you're using a platform like Echo 360 or a free platform like EduCanon, which is a graduate of the Learn Launch Accelerator, that faculty can move from lecturing to active learning in the classroom. Now that's probably a very big change for many faculty members, but certainly the technology is there if the interest to move to more active learning and flipping classrooms is there. The adaptive learning products. I mean, in today's Slate, there's a huge article about Alex. Others maybe. I saw Acrobatic is a sponsor of this conference. And the work at Carnegie Mellon and their Open Learning Initiative has certainly contributed greatly to the idea of students working at their proximate zone, in which faculty can then help make sure that students are working appropriately and giving them more resources and more problems. It's not, the idea that students are just going to be off working only with a computer and not working in groups, I think is not sort of how you see these things deployed. You see them mixed in with building content and skills knowledge and also the application knowledge in projects. Tutoring on demand. Who today can afford to give one-on-one support for all those students that need it? And yet there are now lots of organizations, whether it's Louvain Learning or Chegg or others, or whether it's just simply peer-to-peer connections that are fueled by social media, where students are able to get interventions, perhaps not from somebody who's completely qualified, but depending on whether you're using Louvain or you're using one of the social media approaches, more tutoring on demand, more interventions for students when they need it, and that may be, when we're not, I'm asleep at 10 p.m. I'm not available when they need it, which is certainly often after 10 p.m. And then lastly, just the proliferation of OER resources are a support for student-centered learning, because students can go back. People may not like Khan Academy, but they can flip their own classrooms if they like with some of these platforms, but students can fill in the gaps in their knowledge so that they can get and achieve the way they want to achieve. So those are my top 5: big data, flipped classrooms, adaptive learning products, tutoring on demand, and OER resources.
What's OER?
OER, Open Educational Resources, and these are free resources that are available without cost. And there is, there's actually a very large OpenStack sponsored by Rice University, is at the higher ed levels, CK12 at the K-12 level, and then of course, the Smithsonian and many other organizations sponsor. And even though Acrobatic is moving on, I think the CMU Open Learning Initiatives are still available as an open educational resource.
Eileen, thank you very much for the presentation and for giving us examples of use of technology that are currently in service. We're going to return to our panels very shortly, but we had decided that we wanted to have more of a conversation this afternoon about technology. So I want to open it up to the floor, not only questions but comments. If you've had an experience with technology that you'd like to share with us that we could comment on. So this is an opportunity. It is at the forefront, the use of technology in higher ed, and so we want to have that kind of dialogue if people are interested. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that while I return to the panel. And I want to go back to Nick and Dennis and ask them, when you think of technology, because you both spent most of your time on, and I think it's appropriate, how you educate, the philosophy of education, and then technology fits into that, which is what my opening point was. When you think of your use of technology in problem-based learning, or in the individuation that Dennis is talking about, an approach to students, especially high-need students, where does technology fit in?
Well, with regard to problem-based learning, you're basically, at least in my classes, I'm really trying to teach students how to be researchers. And so that's the model that I use. So technology is used for internet research, for communications. I teach at a community college. I get students from 17 to 70 years old. A lot of them have families. Half of them have advanced degrees already. And lives that they have to live. So one of the biggest uses of technology in my program is just Skype for communications purposes. Most of the work that is done in my classes is done in teams. So, students will figure out when they're all available to talk, and either they'll get together, they'll Skype, they'll conference call. So again, technology is just a means for communication and doing research. If there's a topic area that they need to learn about in order to solve a specific problem, probably YouTube is the go-to website that they use, because there's a wealth of information there. So, it's interesting because I actually teach technology, but I use technology as well as a tool. It's a resource like anything else. Just as I have more kids than adults in my class with their cell phones. As I'm asking questions, when we're doing some research together, they'll be on their cell phones looking at Google and different websites and researching products, whatever it takes to get the job done.
My answer is the same as Nick's, basically. We're teaching people to be independent and to solve problems. And all our people know is to press Google and then they stop. So it's to teach them a lot of other ways to go, to find information, when to believe stuff, when not to believe stuff. And then the other thing is to get them to interact with each other and people in their field online. So it's the resources to make them independent learners.
Thank you. Any comments from the audience? My technology on to see. Okay, well, maybe something will come. Oh, there we go.
Hi, my name is Janice Pydame.
And just speak really loud.
Sure. My name is Janice Pydame, an independent consultant, innovation consultant across sector. So I'm glad neuroscience was brought up. I was kind of hoping that we brought it. It would kind of scare me a bit if I went through this whole conference and the whole front at once. Tremendous amount of research out there over the past 7+ years of really how do we learn physiologically. How is higher ed and or the tech products integrating this new learning into what you do?
Let me turn that to Eileen.
Yeah. I think that there is a lot of interest in the results from learning science, from neuroscience, and I would say that spaced repetition and recall, are probably the most regularly incorporated into tech products. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but essentially it's advice from neuroscience as to how we learn is that, don't cram the night before. If you are studying, space out your studying. And then also that quizzing yourself, and it's the act of recall that actually is what cements something and helps people learn when they're trying to master new content. And so the tech products, something that's as simple as, I mean, people may think flashcards are stupid, but simple as Quizlet and some of the online flashcards are things that when people are trying to master new content, I'm not, obviously we want students to be critical thinkers and learners, but there also is a whole piece of higher education which is mastering new content and learning new skills. And so I would say that really those two, spaced repetition and then recall, are in lots of tech products today.
So I've been looking for something to argue about on the panel, because panels are a lot better if you argue. So the interesting thing about your question, and even part of your answer, Eileen, is that it depends on your definition of learning, okay? So as a worker, we don't use flashcards, okay? We got access to information. So I believe that information's important, but I believe a lot of programs go too much to just trying to say, okay, we gotta learn these 4 ways because this is what the brain research, hold on, not done yet, all right, this is what I like. Because the brain research isn't done yet, hold on, turn off your mic and then,
That's why you got fired.
That's stealing your
but it's really, all right, ignore my sneakers. But it's really, when it comes down to it, and it's about being engaged. And that's very different. Then you can use things, but if you're not engaged, knowing that repetition does this, or this is the best time stuff, that don't mean nothing. So, hold on. There we go.
Okay.
There we go. I'll turn mine off.
Well, I'm with you on this, but there's also, the research that shows that contextually your background knowledge
Yes.
actually has a very strong influence on what you're able to learn. And so this is the challenge that the educators really are dealing with. And the guy who wrote Teach Like a Champion has a great example of this. He had a section on baseball. That basically, if you knew baseball, you could decode and understand and respond to the questions. But if you were from another country that never, where you weren't familiar with baseball, you just wouldn't be able to get it. And so, this is the challenge. I say technology, apply it, depend on what your issue is. It could be administrative, it could be research, it could be academic, it could, it's a tool. And so, it's really going to depend on what your problem is, what you want to actually use. And that's what makes it a challenge, right? Because not everybody in the room knows all of the things out there that they could apply to their problem. And I think that is actually an interesting topic for conversation.
Hold on a second, Howard, before you cut me off. So, I do admit that I sometimes take for granted the contextual knowledge people have, but that doesn't kind of change my stance. The book Teach Like a Champion. How many have read that book? It's kind of a K-12 book.
It's more K-12.
Yeah. But it talks about how to be efficient in a way that's not efficient. So it teaches you how
This is new
to,
work.
it teaches you how to pass papers down here so you save a minute and a half. It teaches things when it's really about the bigger picture engagement. All right. See if I can get an argument going with Nick here.
And sometimes you don't need neuroscience to know what a certain population needs to be successful. Dennis, you were talking about how you're not comfortable relying fully online for some of the population you work with, and that's kind of borne out. If you look at the developmental population, there was some research out of the California higher education system that online learning was not as effective as face-to-face when you were dealing with developmental students. Those students needed more face-to-face contact, more interaction. Even though you can design courses, and we've done this at our college to make them as best as possible for the developmental student, that face-to-face element was critical. And I think one of the presenters this morning was talking about the success in using a hybrid model for developmental. So you can gauge a population based on, I think you're talking about that background knowledge, and if the student's not coming to the table with as much background or as much experience, then maybe technology needs to be modified in that case. Nick?
That's just my 2 cents. I'm not going to argue with you. Just in thinking about that question, I always tend to fall back on, I mentioned the Bransford book, How People Learn. And in that book, they relied on 30 years of research that basically boiled it down to three things. Students come into learning situations with preconceived notions, preconceived knowledge. And if you're going to be effective, you have to figure out a way to bring that to the surface so that you can dispel misunderstandings, misconceptions. Secondly, you have to provide a way to give content knowledge, because you do have to draw upon the deep retrieval knowledge base in order to be effective. And then lastly, and probably most importantly in my book, is the development of metacognition, metacognitive ability, basically understanding yourself as a learner in a reflective way and knowing how to self-regulate your learning. And the reason that I am so into learner-based, learner-centered education is because it's the only one that I'm aware of that actually hits all three of those points. So if you're basing what you do on research, that's my argument.
One of the reasons I brought up this sort of tutoring on demand as one of the top 5 is I think it's actually one of the kind of more exciting things about reorganizing how the face-to-face and the coaching and the interpersonal aspect happens with students. If you look at, again, this is more of a K-12, I'll give some higher ed examples called Think Through Math, where the student is able to get access to a coach at any time. And that's part of what is offered. So Louvain Learning is one of the ones that's doing that in higher ed. Testive, which is essentially just an SAT prep thing, but the thing that's so interesting about it is it's individual coaching that's delivered via Google Hangouts, so it can be less costly. Quite frankly, is what it comes down to for organizations that are struggling with how to deliver the kinds of interactions that are true learning interactions that are learner-centered in a way that could be extremely cost-efficient. Testive, Think Through Math, and even a company called TeachCycle, which is an adult learning company, where they're now delivering professional development for teachers. Essentially, they have a whole online series of videos, but then they're offering individual coaching where you form a relationship with a coach, but it's delivered virtually. And it's just, for $1,200 for a year, and it gets incredible results. Who would think that a professional could benefit from something that costs $1,200 a year? You think, oh my gosh, something like that would cost, an order of magnitude above that. So again, I come back to you're running an entire institution that is online. It's no longer, kind of unique to say that something is online. I think that where things are more unique now is how people are orchestrating these one-on-one relationships of coaching online, which can still be very meaningful.
Let me tell you, Eileen, we use an online tutoring service to support our 1,600 students, and we went through 3 times what we budgeted this year for that service. There's a lot of services out there, but when you can get tutoring online 24/7, students love to have that. We use an e-library where they have 24/7 access to reference librarians. So at any time of night or day, they can access a librarian. So, Dennis talked about relationships. Sometimes relationships are personal, and those are probably the best, but also, relationships with providers that technology is enabling that you otherwise could not have. Any other questions or examples from our audience about technology? Okay, otherwise I'll turn it over. Oh, there's one there.
I just wanted to second what Eileen had said. My name is Leslie Schneider. I'm a co-founder of a startup called Visual Classrooms. It's a spin-off of a Tufts University NSF-funded research project to support inquiry learning, active learning. We spent a lot of time looking at what teachers were doing in classrooms, both college and high school, and found that they really weren't doing inquiry learning, and that we had to go back and figure out what their problems were in supporting active learning and moving what I'll call teachers in transition to these new methodologies, just inching along without imposing new frameworks that were rigid and had to be followed. And we found The thing that we could do was to support having active and productive conversations among kids and with teachers. And it's a technology that's readily available if people want to look at it.
Any comments?
And the question is, just kidding.
I want to come back to the issue of personalization, which I think has really characterized your brand of education, Dennis. And are we at a point where every student is going to have a personalized approach, a personalized program, a personalized dashboard of things that they can look at that can be shared with their teachers? Are we getting to that kind of point in higher education?
I think it can be, but it can't be like most online pieces, just the convenience of when you can do it and the speed you can do it. So everyone's kept the content the same, not everyone, but the content basically the same, and they've changed those two things and they call it personalized. So I'd like to take the next step to really figure out how does everyone have a chance to be engaged. So what you're interested in, what you're interested in, what you're interested in, very different. And if I could get you to do a project around there, I could get you reading and writing and thinking a whole lot better because you love that project. So I'm afraid people have taken the word personalization. See, I think it's what's happened, and it's very interesting. So online, a lot, and I don't know, it would be good to discuss in your case, they talk about being personalized, right? Because you can do it at midnight, and I can spend 2 hours, you can spend 1 hour. On the other hand, you have to be depersonalized in many ways because you're developing a system that if something doesn't work right, it kicks you out of the system. So I've worked with many groups where somebody owed $1 and it kicked her out of the system. Or if something wasn't in by 11:59, it kicked you out of the system. So where it was trying to be personalized, the fact that it's done in that way, you have to set up a system that does the opposite sometimes. I don't know how you deal with that.
Well, we have some systems. We're not completely systemless. But I'm wondering whether we'll get to the point where, students have to log in and they have to have assignments due at certain dates, but I'm wondering whether we will get to the point where students can log in anytime, anywhere, but not necessarily into a class, but curating various, it's a form of competency-based where they're coming in when they want to come in. It might be 10 minutes one day, an hour another day. I know that I read something about you saying that students should always stay beyond the bell. I think that's what you're getting at. Maybe
I had no bells in my schools, by the way.
So no bells, but is technology going to get us to that point where it's so fluid that we're able to, I guess, curate competencies over time with different people, with different peer groups, that would make it much more flexible.
Only if we believe in that kind of learning.
Well, I think this brings up actually, the faculty is the group that is actually, they're the ones that are interacting with the students and delivering the learning. And I hear again and again from entrepreneurs that faculty fear this change. For every Nick Mazza, there are others who fear and don't want to change. And so I think that's why I believe that this is a change that will take 10 plus years, 10 to 15 years, because as the software gets better, as there's more Alexes and more acrobatics, and that can help with the actual learning of the skills, if you will, the premium will be on the things that you two gentlemen are talking about, which is the problems, the projects, the application of the knowledge, which, as far as I know, while there are tools to deliver, sort of make a movie, make a presentation, write a paper, make a presentation. Nobody has there's no technology that is about the application of knowledge, and so that speaks to the incredible challenge and excitement, I think, actually, for faculty.
One of the projects that we worked on probably about 10 years ago, it was a professional development. This is through the New England Board again. This was Photon 2. recognize now. Anyways, so we had a professional development program that was online. We were teaching teachers from all over the country and actually in some of Europe as well, teaching them optics. And we worked with the University of Connecticut's MEAG School of Education to develop instructional methodology that would apply adult learning principles to the online environment. And basically, we had two different systems that we had set up. The first one was teacher-centered, and the second one was learner-centered. And the teacher-centered, basically, imagine the instructor at the center, and everybody's tied into the instructor. And fortunately, I'm so glad that I wasn't the instructor because she was getting emails day and night all over the place. So the second time we ran that, we set up mini cohorts, little teams, and each team had a team leader, and that all of those little mini hubs then connected to the instructor. So you're basically diversifying the learning, spreading it out, so that the one instructor in the center didn't have to necessarily be the one answering all the questions 24/7. They could rely on themselves, and then you have a scheduled period of time where you could communicate with the instructor directly. But it kind of forced the students to think on their own, to solve problems on their own, and we provide all the background supports to do that. But it was all about the interaction. Once you enhance interaction, so the learning environment. I think 40% of the variance associated with learning has to do with the learning environment. It's the biggest piece of the pie. So if you can set up a learning environment, whether it's online, classroom, or a hybrid of sorts, that is definitely going to positively impact learning outcomes.
And by the way, isn't that what the workplace is like?
Yeah, exactly.
What you just, so in terms of it addresses bridging some of the gaps that might exist between the workplace and the educational system.
The saying I use sometimes is going online to get offline. That's the purpose. Purpose isn't to go online and just stay there, but it's to go online so you can get off and do something.
Yeah, and as we're coming to a shift, I want to shift to the topic of educational effectiveness, pardon me, and the use of technology in measuring effectiveness, because some of you might, I'm sure most institutions here are accredited by NEASC, and some of you may have been participating in the sessions that are on the reformation of the standards. And it's interesting that in the new standards that are proposed, there's no longer a separate standard on faculty, and there's no longer a separate standard on library resources. Instead, there's a new standard on learning and teaching, and there's a separate standard now on educational effectiveness, which I think shows the shift in thinking from measuring inputs into the educational process to what are the outcomes. And I'm just wondering whether technology can be used to more effectively not only create better outcomes, but measure and demonstrate outcomes to employers and to accreditors, and help us and see if what we're doing is working. I'll ask you, Eileen, because I want to see if there's any technology that's out there that can help us with
Actually,
that.
I was going to turn it back to the group and say, do you have standards? Because actually in K-12 there are standards, and so they are doing it in K-12. But in higher ed, I'm not sure that there are standards. I mean, in certain narrow areas, there may be professional certifications. So if you're, if you're involved in, advanced manufacturing, there are certifications and standards. But in many areas, they're there to be developed.
Right. Well, in higher ed, you have standards, and you might have a mission that needs to be, verified, or you might have programs that have learning outcomes that you could measure. So those would be your standards.
At a very basic level, we try to use video to actually watch somebody doing stuff and then putting those online rather than writing something. We're trying to work on something now. Maybe I'll come work in your little place there.
Not so little.
Big place, excuse me. Got 32 different people.
There's 6,000 people. That's
Hold
small.
on, I knew I should have turned your mic off earlier. In your beautiful place,
Well, it
but
started off with my name is Eileen, not Ellen.
yeah.
He knew that.
I knew that. But how do you? We're looking at how do you have an app when you're working with adult learners that they can, in the middle of their work, being able to show, record what they're doing, because it's a very different place. And
That's kind of a portfolio concept.
yeah. We had somebody who learned how to do a survey in our class, and then went and talked to her boss, that should be some credit, then actually ran it on her group, then analyzed the data. So how do you grab that?
Right,
You know,
right.
so, Eileen.
Okay. Sir?
Yeah, I'd like to ask the panel, what current learning technology do they wish was available when they were students?
That's easy. The internet.
Calculator.
Chalk.
I was at
Slide rule, I heard those were great, man.
I had slide rules.
Most people don't even know what that is.
I was at the National Science Foundation last week, and they had a professor from Yale giving the keynote, and she put up a picture of a library with books, and asked if anybody remembered what that was.
A place to have coffee and meet your friends.
Right. I think there was somebody way in the back. Was they seeing things? Somebody stand up so I'm not a liar. Okay. So any other questions or comments?
I have a quick question getting back to this statement about learning environments. We're in the process for Middlesex Community College, and we're in the process of writing our online strategic plan, our 3-year strategic plan for online learning. And that also includes sort of the on-ground environments as well. Can you talk about that online or that learning environment of the future? What the smart classroom in 10 years or 5 years is going to look like?
I got no clue, but I would think it doesn't look anything like it looks now. It's the same way that everything's gonna be here, okay? And so, or here in my fancy watch or whatever, but the access is gonna be much more integrated, much more, not this program, all the things that we think are cool new bells and whistles will be integrated in to things we do, allowing us to do all those things.
But what's interesting, I come from, my discipline is communications, and there was a theorist, Marshall McLuhan, Canadian communications theorist that many of you have heard about, and his theory about the changing of communications media, that there's the rear view mirror theory, which is each new iteration has a large reflection of where it came from, so that if you looked at early radio looked like vaudeville, television looked like radio, cable television looks like television. It's different, but there's a lot of elements, and internet is going to look a little like television. So I think, your online class, even though I think Dennis is right, there are going to be some things that we don't envision right now that are going to be 5 years away. But I think you're still going to have some of the same elements where you're going to have peer-to-peer interaction, you're going to have peer-to-faculty interaction, you're going to have some form of visual and auditory presentation of material. So I think it's easy to say that it's always revolutionary when it's really evolutionary.
I agree. I'm sorry. I did my doctoral dissertation on persistence in online learning, and found that as long as the environment promotes social interaction and scaffolds the development of self-regulatory behavior, those people are going to be more likely to be successful in the online environment. Some people are cut out for it, some people are not, but you can build scaffolds into the system to support that interaction, to encourage and require. I think UMass Online requires a certain level of interaction with all the participants in an online course. So it's less about the technology, more about the communication between instructor and students.
I think that it's less about, that everything is going to have a component of digital, even the residential college, so that there will be much more of a mix of students having, on the standard courses, having high quality adaptive software available, but then this incredible need for the projects and the authentic performance assessments and the authentic application of those skills in teams and in groups, as well as the faculty actually. And this is where I've heard a lot of this is coming out of what used to be called libraries. Just the whole issue of who knows all of the experiences that are available now. They used to be called books. Now there are all these interactive experiences. Who can recommend what is appropriate for any given student. So there'll be a mix of students working on their own, a mix of sort of the problem-based learning, which drives the student engagement and interest and sort of causes them to go back into getting skills that they might not have. And then it could be face-to-face with a digital component, or it could be online. I think that's becoming less of what that used to be new 10 years ago, and it's more this mixing of different resources, I think, in the future.
And the technology might democratize education in a way that if it's really become more competency-based, and we figure out what that word means and how to assess, then, this is like a college class. Going to the zoo might be a college, credit. So there's ways to start recording what people are learning and doing all through the world, rather than just having to be a class.
And I think that would be some good ending comments. I want to thank our panel for a great session. I want to thank our audience for coming to this session and for attending the conference at Medicine. Wish you all the best with your technology as you go forward.
Where it's partly academic, but it's more social emotional. They're all in a 25-person cohort group with an instructional team, and they get to know one another. So when classes start, they know that there are people who like them, who they are like.